friends, thanks for joining me for a conversation with my friend that's really as close to me as a brother, Jerald January, the senior pastor of Vernon Park Village, located in Linwood, Illinois. And it's 2 miles southeast of Chicago. So if you're ever in that area, that's the church you want to visit, Vernon Park Village.
That's it.
Before we jump into today's content, I want to tell you about an exciting opportunity that you can be a part of. It's the Vital Leadership Summit. It's a one-day event that's going to be held at the Hyatt Place Lenexa City Center in Lenexa, Kansas. And this event will take place on June 29th. It is a one-day event that brings together pastors and leaders from all parts of the United States. The summit is going to focus on a real exciting theme, creating a culture that sticks. Registration is now available. And if you visit bjcvon.com, B as in boy, jcvon.com to register and learn more about this event. It's going to be something that you don't want to miss. Well, welcome to What's Next podcast with Bishop Jack Vaughn, a conversation designed to help leaders be the person others choose to follow. I am here today as your host because today I have a very good friend again, Brother Jerald January in the studio with me. Jerald, today I'm excited to have you.
My pleasure.
Excited to have you. And today I'm really excited because I get to ask all the questions. And I get to open up with this audience of viewers to your story and your expertise in ministry. So, Jerald, thank you very much for joining us today. What a pleasure. And for those of you who don't know, Jerald and I want to share a little bit about him. He's born in the inner city of Detroit in 1956 at the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. He was firsthand witness to the complicated process of social change. And from his boyhood in a violent urban neighborhood to his calling to be a minister today, Jerald recounts his experiences in much of his writing and in seminars and workshops and his lectures of issues such as gang violence, school integration, discrimination, class distinction, and the racial prejudice. And he discusses his own journey of faith, which he will be doing today, and how he found his call to serve God in the midst of all of these struggles. Now, Jerald, I know you very well, but our audience may be unfamiliar with your story. Yeah. So can we take some time and tell our viewers about your testimony of humble beginnings in the inner city of Detroit?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for allowing me to be here in Kansas City,
sure,
home of the Royals and DC and all that. And the Chiefs. I can't leave them out.
Yes, sir.
Actually, I guess I should start from being a child. I was born in Detroit on the west side and lived in the neighborhood that was famous for people starting something from nothing.
Wow. From
the auto industry to actually Motown. I mean, my family knew a lot of the people that were actually became famous, like Aretha Franklin. My grandfather used to babysit Aretha Franklin, and my mom and aunt were in the same classroom with Smokey Robinson. He was just Bill in those days. And my father's first girlfriend in Detroit actually ended up being a Supreme, Mary Wilson.
Wow, okay.
So they knew all of these folks. And it was just one of those neighborhoods, a lot of folks that migrated up north from Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi. When my mom and dad got married, they were very young. And actually, in 1959, when I was about 3 years old, there was an incident in my home that changed my entire life.
Wow.
And even though I was barely 3, I remember it like it was yesterday. Someone knocked on the door, I heard my mother scream, and I heard a pop, pop, and I ran in the kitchen, and she was shot 3 more times and killed right in front of me. And that's my first memory. Seeing, and I didn't really understand what was going on. I saw the screen door close and somebody run down the back stairs and heard my great-grandmother screaming, and she opened the front door and ran down the hallway. And I was looking at my mom, and I guess as a kid, I couldn't understand all what was going on. But to this day, I remember the smell of gun smoke. Wow. And most of my life, I could not handle being around fireworks because the smell of gunpowder would make me nauseous. And I watched as she was dying for a few minutes. I saw her head swelling up. So I remember running out, and Most of that I remembered, even when the police came in and retrieved us from the neighbor's apartment. 11 years later, I found out who actually had killed her, because our grandparents who raised us after my mom died, my father's parents, they always told us, because they figured we didn't remember it, that she died in a car accident.
Wow.
Or an accident. But I would remember what happened. But in those days, you didn't talk back to your grandparents
Right,
or parents.
absolutely.
You never said,
Right.
I don't believe you, because you would get something called a whipping. I know today it's called timeout, but it was called knockout in those days. But anyway.
I brought you in, I'll take you out.
That's exactly what it was. But when I was almost 13, one of my cousins mentioned to my brother, that your mom didn't die in a car accident. She got shot. And the moment I heard that, I felt released. I went and told my grandmother. I remembered everything. And she explained to me what happened that day. And I also found out that day the guy that killed her was my father.
Wow.
Which he was my hero. And then it didn't make sense. So how is he here and he murdered her? There was a lot of things that happened. And by the time I was 16, I was so disillusioned, though I'd been playing football in high school and that kind of thing. There was a part of me that could never connect all of this and became depressed. And I know there's a lot of issues today with teen suicide, and there's a lot of murders in the city, but not in those days.
Right.
I was the only person I knew that had someone in their family that had been murdered and that type of thing. And I didn't have a mom. Everybody had a mom but me. I had a grandma, but it was my mother. And I decided to kill myself. I was going to commit suicide. And though I knew what church was, I went to church with my grandmother to be her bodyguard. And I would sit in the back of the church while they worshiped and fall asleep during the preaching. But that evening, on Christmas Eve night, 1973, when I was going to commit suicide, Jack, I tell you, I never prayed before. But as I was writing out the suicide note, I heard a voice that said, "Try me first."
Wow.
And
Amazing.
I actually thought someone had broken the house. And the only person who was at home that night was my grandmother.
But you heard the voice.
I heard an audible voice. It wasn't I heard something inside of me.
Sure.
Outside of the bathroom, I was sitting on the bathroom floor, I heard a voice that tried me first. I opened the door, there was no one there.
Wow.
And when I went back in to scoop up the pills to take, something in my heart said, well, what if that was God? What if there's really a God? And so I ran to the bedroom fully clothed, and I laid across the bed. And I always had insomnia growing up. I could never fall asleep. I basically prayed and said, if you're God, put me to sleep, because if you don't, I'll kill myself. I fell asleep that night faster than any night I ever fell asleep. I actually blinked my eyes and I was awake. And I wake up on Christmas morning, and I remember the announcements from church that Sunday at my grandma's church, at New Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church in Detroit. And they said that we're going to have a Christmas service, 10 a.m. on Christmas morning. And I got up that morning, and for the first time in my life, Christmas didn't mean presents. So I put on, I remember it, I called it my John Shaft outfit. Black pants, black turtleneck, black leather jacket. I picked out my 12-inch afro. And I walked right past the Christmas tree. I remember my brother saying, where are you going? I said, I'm going to church. My grandmother was stunned.
Wow.
You're going to church? I said, yeah, I'm going to walk up to the church. I had never done that by myself in my life, but, I could do that. And I got to the church, and I was shocked. It was almost empty. There was maybe 50, 60 people in the church that holds 2,000 folks.
Wow.
And that morning, Pastor James Newby, preached a sermon called God's Gift. It's the first time I had ever heard a sermon all the way through in my life. Wow. And it made so much sense.
How old were you then?
I was 16.
16.
It was the week before my 17th birthday. I was born on December 31st, New Year's Eve, and 1956. So I remember thinking how scary it would be to walk to the front of the church. A lot of Sundays I thought, man, how can anybody walk to the front of the church and say they want to become a Christian? It's scary. I played football, with some crazy guys, but I was scared of that.
Sure.
And but for some reason, I looked down the aisle, and it seemed like it became 30 yards wide.
Sure, absolutely.
I walked down, and he came down and shook my hand and said, your name? I said, Jerald Janeway. Oh, I know your grandmother. I said, yes, sir. He said, so what do you want today? I said, I really want God, but I don't want to be bored. He said, well, so what do you want? I said, tell God I never want to be bored. If being a Christian is boredom, then I'll go back, And he prayed that prayer And that became my new birthday, December
Wow, my
25th.
God.
So that's how I became a
Amazing.
Christian, yeah.
Amazing. I hear you talk about the violence that you've seen and experienced. And here recently on the news, they've had a lot of coverage about Chicago.
Yeah.
And Chicago currently facing a devastating surge of lethal violence in addition to staggering rates of poverty across Illinois. And I mean, it's happening in other cities, but Chicago seems to be highlighted here lately. And policymakers and community leaders are struggling with finding short and long-term solutions to stem the violence and allow neighborhoods to heal. So as we look at this across the country, not just in Chicago, with communities who are fearing for their own safety here, even in Kansas City with the drive-by shootings that we're having, and here recently on the news with the babies that have been in these cars and these children that have been in homes just innocently sitting up, and then bullets are being sprayed in the car or in the house that they're living in. And then we're seeing this grief over lost parents, over children, over friends, and leaders every day. And the stakes of getting solutions right could not even be higher than what they are now. So neighborhoods have this high level of violence and also characterized by high levels of poverty. And so can you, as a pastor in the Midwest and as a pastor, you pastored right in Chicago, now Vernon Park Village is in Linwood. So can you share your assessment of what you're sensing and seeing?
That's Bishop. Thank you. That's a loaded question. We don't have enough time today to talk about. But let me talk about some of the few things. Being the survivor of fatal violence, and I'm 60 years old now. That's 57 years ago.
Sure.
I still deal with it today. I could have never imagined the level of violence that cities see today, and the number of young people that I deal with on a daily basis, a weekly basis in the schools and in our church.
Absolutely.
Most of them know at least one person that's been murdered or shot in their family, not just their neighborhood. So here's what people don't understand, I don't think, that it's horrible today, but 10 years from now, just the mental burden of it is worse.
Yes.
And so we're seeing a lot more suicide and other. Our church from 1985 until 2015 was located on the corner of 90th and Stony Island on the south side. And let me just say this. There's a lot of good things and wonderful things happening in Chicago right now, right on the south side. But if it bleeds, it leads, especially in certain communities. And I believe that's part of an underlying, I hate to say conspiracy, because I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm a realist. So when you see it, and when you live it every day, and I'm around good people every day, but the level of care for certain communities and support is not the same.
I mean, we see that in our cities.
Yeah.
We see it here in Kansas City.
Yeah.
So exactly.
5 years ago, for instance, the mayor closed 50 schools in the inner city on the exact same day. In the history of America, that hasn't happened in a state in one day. He did it in the city of Chicago. At the same time, they flood millions and millions of dollars to other parts of Chicago to put up boat yachts and parks and that type of thing. And so we just don't have the money for it for this part of the city. And then you have higher taxes in one part of the city where the commercial entities can't come. So if there's lack of jobs, like on the south side, there's one job for every 10 adults. Wow. But on the north side and the north suburbs, there's 10 jobs for every one adult.
Wow.
So it's not, poverty breeds violence.
Absolutely.
It does.
I agree.
And it breeds desperation. Now that doesn't take away from what people are doing, but it makes you start feeling that you're not as good. And a lot of our young people have gotten to that place, but now it's becoming multi-generational. So on top of all of the violence, people have to know there's always a cause for the effect.
Absolutely.
So these things have helped it. Now, on top of saying that, when you look at yourself and you see hate, you hate what you see, then it becomes almost a form, genocide becomes what I call a community suicide. And being a pastor, for a lot of the young and old people, the churches are, in many cases, the last piece of hope in a community.
Absolutely.
And so it's an honor and a burden to do what I do like with you in the city of Chicago, because even when it comes to government funds, people, mayors, politicians, I love you guys, but you get on TV and say, churches have to do more. We're the only entities you don't give money to.
And Gerald, let me just say that we have vision and we have those desires to do more, but we have to have resources.
Thank you.
And it takes resources to do outreach, take resources to do ministry, and a lot of times they see us and they see people gathering, they see all the cars around our building, and then they're saying, what do those preachers know with all those money? But they don't understand, like they have expenses in their house. The actual building has expenses.
Thank you.
And most of our churches, the overhead, and if you look at people now, they complain about how high their gas bills are, how high their utility bills are at their home and taxes and things of that nature, whereas those companies will let them make arrangements and things. They don't do that for commercial people.
No, they don't.
They'll cut your lights off in a minute.
Sure they will.
So you don't get those kind of options. And I often say that church is the only organization to me and business/ministry that is so unpredictable because we don't know what we're going to get from one weekend to the next.
You never know. And it's such a shame that there may be 1 or 2 or a percent of ministers nationwide, that pimp the people.
Yeah.
And they use the money to buy jets and everything else, Right. And what's so interesting is people will take that particular example and put it on the 98%.
Group all of us in the same boat. All they want is your money.
Right. Well, I'll let you know, he's not getting all their money, neither am I. So it's not happening that way.
Absolutely. Folks. And you speak about those relationships, and that's why I see you wearing one of our shirts, Love More. We came up with that in our clothing line, the Love More. Then I had the APMG, All People Matter to God, because people are hopeless.
Yes.
And so when we were dealing with the communication issues between police and the community, we said, okay, now we need to close this divide. And I'm seeing that. You mentioned something earlier about the suicide, and I just want you to kind of talk for a minute on that, because in your journey of faith, finding your calling to serve God in the midst of all of these struggles, and we see this suicide rate escalating. I had 2 last year, almost within a month apart, one within our family and another one with the family in our congregation. This, sometimes we think of mental illness as a person that has to deal with a diagnosis, has mental retardation or some type of dysfunction, but I don't think we realize that even depression is a mental illness. And it doesn't have to be permanent, Jerald. It can be temporary. I've gone through it. I've experienced it. And when I did a series on faces, smiling faces sometimes don't tell the truth, and dealt with depression, and then went to Scripture and dealt with people in the Bible that had temporary depression and how they dealt with it, and how that there is a need now to manage emotions in the midst of our struggles, our trials, and our things that we walk through. Temptations and testings do not exempt us from experiencing temporary depression.
There's something called stressors nowadays. I love how America has a name for everything. So now they said, young people are facing stressors. All it means is a strain on your mind. And stressors cause depression. When you look at the 3 leading causes of death for our young people under 24 years old, it's homicide, accidents, and suicide. And it's not always economic. It's actually the strain of life that's upon them, from bullying to sexual abuse to the body image issues that a lot of young people have. And one of the indications of hopelessness is when a young person or any person says, I can't do anymore. And they plan and try to carry out their own demise. In the last year or so, one of the ways it's happened multiple times. I mentioned yesterday in the service, I showed a couple, 3 young people on the screen that had committed suicide live on Facebook. And the reasoning for their deaths at their ages, 14, 17, 18 years old, you would think they should have had support systems to get around that, but they didn't have that. And so not only is homicide an issue, suicide is an issue as well. And in both cases, there are a lot of instances where the homicide or suicide attempts are not successful, but the scars that remain
Absolutely.
are lifelong. And so there are a lot of things that not just the church, but we as people have to help this generation, because if 40 and unders don't live, then our generation won't survive.
Absolutely.
That's simply the case.
That's awesome, Jerald. You authored a book that's available even on Amazon, and just this morning I was at a place taking care of some business, and one of my members worked there, and asked me, how could they get your book? And I was telling them that the book was even available on Amazon, but it's titled A Messed Up Ride or a Dressed Up Walk. Will you talk about that? What inspired you to write that book?
Well, actually, at the time I was the head of Compassion International USA, and HarperCollins had heard me at a press conference in Los Angeles, heard some of my story, and approached and said, could you write a book? And they said, called it an airplane book, make it small enough that young people would want to actually read it as well. And so I wrote it, and it was 12 chapters of things happening in my life, including my mom's death. And I chose the title because one time when I was 17, I wanted a new car. My granddad said, no, we can use that old Bonneville over there.
Bonneville,
I know what that
is.
Bonneville beat up and tore up. And I complained that girls wouldn't want to drive in it. He said, well, son, a messed up ride is better than a dressed up walk. He said, and it became a kind of a cue for life.
Right.
Life won't always give you a Cadillac or a first-class journey, but as long as you can make progress, make the progress, because time is of the essence. And so the book is now in its fourth print, I believe. It's now on Cool Springs Publishing, and you can go on Amazon.
So tell them again.
It's called A Messed Up Ride or a Dressed Up Walk. It's available on the Amazon, any Amazon site, or if you want to go on our website, vpcog.org, runninpartchurchguide.org, you can order it off of that or any of the titles of books that I've written.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, next month when we come back, and before we close, what would you say? One question I want to ask you to someone who may be considering, because this is an issue that people are dealing with such a heavy depression now and discouragement, and with our country being so uncertain and unstable, we don't know what we're going to hear from one day to the next. And people are saying, what am I going to do if my health care is not there? What am I going to do if there is not money for education? So what would you say to someone considering just giving up on life due to their past because of what you've experienced, what you walked through? And you ministered at our ministry just this past Sunday, and it was just incredible how the altar was so flooded with people. And I saw one of our youth who we've been working with, the family, a very troubled young man because of some family issues and not having his father in his life. And I literally saw him come to the altar and fall on his knees and weep. And then I brought him to the office afterwards. And he said, he was almost shocked when I said, would you like to meet him? And he said, can I? I said, sure, you come in the office and meet him. And he came in there, and he said, you really helped him. So here was a young man really about to give up. And we were concerned about him graduating because some things had happened. And so I asked him, I said, are you going to be able to graduate? And thank God the school was working with his mother and making sure that he's able to get a diploma by taking a few more classes online. So that had impact. Not just impact, it had imprint upon his life. So again, what would you say to someone considering giving up because of their past?
I know what pain is, and I don't ever minimize anyone's pain, because pain is pain. When pain gets so hard, you just want to say, that's it. I don't want to do it anymore. For many years when I was younger, realizing my mom was murdered and just didn't die, I suffered depression. But through the prayers and the support of family and good friends, I made it through. Years later, God allowed me to marry a wonderful woman who I've been married to for 30 years. And then last year, January the 30th, she went on a Starbucks run and never came home. We found her dead in her car 9 hours later. It's the best friend I ever had. And just this past year and a half, I realized what grief was again. I thought I'd been through something, and I had to. During my mom's murder, 2 of my brothers were murdered later on in my life, and my first marriage ended in divorce. I got married in college, and it just didn't work. But I thought since I survived all that and God had allowed me to do things and travel the world, that I had enough testimony. But there was one more test. To find the woman I love more than my next breath, dead in her car at 1:40 in the morning. I even doubted my faith. I'm a pastor, been ministering for 41 years. And I crawled down the street on my knees at 1:45 in the morning and begged God to bring her back. And I accused God of not loving me anymore. I can tell you, 50 pounds lighter. This is the first time I've met Kansas City, and
Right, yeah.
since she's gone away, she loved this
No,
place.
she come with you when you would
Every
come.
time.
Yeah.
That God, he didn't mind me accusing him and swearing and almost just saying, you couldn't be real when this happened. He waited till all the horror was out of me, and he told me, son, I still love you.
Wow.
And you still have joy.
Amen.
And I'm going to give you your life back. But this was always in the plan. And you're going to be all right. And I can tell you today, I can't tell you how, but God healed my heart. And he'll heal yours too. Just trust him. Trust him. He's real.
Thank you, Jerald. It has been a very powerful, powerful podcast and sharing with you. And next month, when we come back, we're going to talk specifically about a subject that's very near to Jerald, wisdom and understanding. So our podcast audience, you really don't want to miss next month's podcast as we continue our conversation with this awesome and incredible man of God, Jerald January, my friend and brother.
God bless you.